that prevails. But Badiou is simply, I mean, really, he's just going to reverse this. It's really all he's trying to begin with here. His thesis is the one is not, which may sound like a kind of a complex metaphysical claim. The one is not, and you wonder what that means. But all he's trying to tell you is the one is not tied to being. We don't think the one in terms of being. The one instead is a question of appearance, which means that the one is an operation. The one is imposed on multiplicity.
And it says so explicitly on page 24.
Thank you. Yeah, page 24 is where he explicitly makes that point. So we've got the one is not, instead it must be thought as an operation, a question of appearance. For things to appear, they have to go through this operation of being counted as one.
The operation is the count as one.
Yeah. And then on the other hand, we're going to say that the multiple is. This is being. Of course, the way he's going to do that is going to be a bit complex. We'll work over the next couple of meditations here. And so this is what we've got. Now we've got the one as a question of the operation, the multiple as a question of being. That's what he's doing on pages 23, 24, or so. With his revamping of this, we need to talk about two things: the situation and structure. We can talk about it in those terms. The situation versus structure, which he himself is going to say is problematic a moment later. But we can start with that formulation of the problem.
We're looking at the middle of 24.
Thank you, page 24. Yeah, next we're throwing page numbers out behind me because I'm kind of working through the concepts rather than the pages at this point. So yeah, situation versus structure. The situation being the multiplicity itself, and structure being the oneness that is imposed on that situation.
Sorry.
Yeah,
I don't know if this is super important, but he says specifically that the situation is a presented multiple. Is that different from approaching a multiple in terms of being outside of presentation, right? Is that important to make that?
Do you mind,
I don't know.
May I read the text?
Yeah.
So he says, let's fix the terminology. I term situation any presented multiplicity granted the effectiveness of the presentation. And stop me if you want to make a point. A situation is the place of taking place, whatever the terms of the multiplicity in question. Every situation emits its own particular operator of the count as one. This is the most general definition of a structure. It is what prescribes for a presented multiple the regime of its count as one.
Right. So this is presented. This is, as he's going to term it further along in the book, represented. Presented again. Structured. So that's the difference we're working with here. Now, as I say, he goes on immediately to say that this is problematic in some ways to talk about this because we only experience structured situations. You don't experience pure presented situation as such. You just don't experience it.
I.e. inconsistent.
Inconsistent.
Yeah, inconsistent.
Right. And so once he points this out, he says we've got to think about this rather instead of it being in terms of situation versus structure, we want to talk about inconsistent multiplicity versus consistent multiplicity.
And as I understand it, there's also a collapse of the inconsistent multiple.
A collapse?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's posited as a possibility, but then is later, as I understand it, rejected. Because, at least, right, if I can go to 25,
okay.
There is nothing apart from situations. Ontology, if it exists, is a situation. We immediately find ourselves caught in this double difficulty. And then he goes on to it later, right, which is, in order to pose this sort of unstructured situation, right, is to smuggle in or presuppose a hidden one, right, this external thing that then secretly.
I think it makes the point. I think it makes the point with the Timaeus, right? It's Plato's sort of it's Timaeus' sort of exposition of the creation of the universe, right? You have the four elements, but you also have a creator who uses them all up. So is it the case that you have the four elements, but the sort of smuggling in on the one is the creator itself that organizes?
Yeah, but he's not throwing out the possibility of inconsistent multiplicity. He's pointing out that that's a potential operator, but he argues against that and returns to the inconsistent multiplicity. As I'm reading it. What I'm seeing happen, let me get my reading, I guess, all the way on the table here.
Sure.
Page 25, somewhere on that page, he says, well, I'll just quote from my notes. He says somewhere on that page, the multiple is the inertia which can be retroactively discerned starting from the fact that the operation of the count as one must effectively operate in order for there to be oneness. So that what we're talking about with inconsistent multiplicity is the inertia, so to speak, that's moving toward consistency. And that can't be experienced as such by nature. But the whole point of trying to think ontology throughout this whole book is to say ontology does think this inconsistent multiplicity.
But I mean, in this case, I guess what I see is I see Badiou moving. This just given the text we have as of right now, right? Because once we get to the event, all bets are off.
Okay.
So that I want to make that clear now on the table. And so the inconsistent.
Although I think there's enough here to make the argument I'm making, but go ahead.
Well, in this case, right, the materialist position, right, is that the après coup is it's après coup, it's retroactive, which is to say that materially speaking, the only thing that we are presented with would be a situation,
Right.
which is a set as such. And so what we have to, what I see, especially given from my Lacanian background and what I believe is Badiou's Lacanian background, is to be a proper materialist, the inconsistent multiple in a temporal sense doesn't exist beforehand, right? It only exists from the point.
From here.
Right.
Retroactive.
Right, and so the failure of previous philosophy is to attempt to give a situation or make that inconsistent multiple the one. Which right, as opposed to oneness, which can be thought of as a situation as such.
Can we make the distinction between one and oneness?
Yeah, so oneness is going to be the question of the operation. The one is going to be where one is taken as being. That simple distinction. So what I'm not sure I'm following you because I think we're thinking of this in quite different terms. So let me make a couple of distinctions here and see if this clarifies where we're at. Here we have being. Here we have appearance. The reason we say that being as such, this inconsistent multiple, is can only be retroactively discerned, is because by nature we are always over here. That's just this is whatever we experience has been counted as one.
Actually, let me qualify. I'm just wrong.
Okay.
I now realize that, and we get this later through our reading. What is not consistent in set theory? The sets. The axioms, right? They are indefinable as such, and so they become the first principles by which the entire appearance, right, the entire inferential apparatus of set theory is then, created. So in this case, I'm just wrong.
Okay.
You're absolutely right. The set which remains undefined, the axioms which themselves are not consistent and just simply posited are the inconsistent multiple.
Right. Badiou is trying to do two things at once here, right? For one, he's trying to lay out this relationship between being and appearance. Being here as pure multiplicity, inconsistent multiplicity, and appearance as the operation of the oneness has rendered this structured, experientiable, consistent. So he wants to get that, if you will, he wants to point that out in general, but then he wants to say, can we talk about ontology? If ontology is the thought of being, and if being is only retroactively discernible, then how does ontology work, is the question he's asking. And that's the question, can this be thought by subtracting the one? Can this be subtracted from the play of appearance?
So, I mean, he goes on to talk about, he says, this is the bottom of 25, there's nothing apart from situations, there's only situations. I guess what I'm understanding is until it goes to the operation, the count is one, then it becomes a structured situation that is a structure. So ontology, if it exists, is a situation. We immediately find ourselves caught in a double difficulty, which was what you were alluding to. On the other hand, a situation is a presentation. Does this mean that a presentation of being is as such is necessary? It seems that rather the being, in quotes there, is included in any presentation presents, included in what any presentation presents. One cannot see how it could be being. One cannot see how it could be presented qua being. So.
Yeah, and that aporia is precisely what founds Levinas' project. That's where Levinas takes his orientation. To say that ontology is a situation is to say that, we've got to think of it as a consistent multiplicity, because it's always going to be a structured situation. And that leads to this aporia that you just read. And that's exactly what Levinas does. This is why Levinas's entire project is say we've got to think infinity, but it's got to be, we need a God, right? There's got to be a God that comes in and guarantees the consistency of this project.
And if I may interject with my hatred of Levinas.
Yeah.
I mean, and this is why, it's sort of like, I mean, he explicitly says, it's a sort of anti-theology,
Yeah.
right? Which is,
Badiou says that, or Levinas says that.
Badiou's, I think they both say it's an anti-theology, roughly
Yeah,
speaking.
but Levinas is not right.
Yeah.
In his argument.
No, I mean, and this is sort of the thing, right, is rather than positing, you know, a beneficial, right, Platonic God, which then renders the inconsistencies consistent, what happens is for Levinas, that radical inconsistency simply becomes alterity. I mean, he says it's alterity as such.